And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story. Some dates feel like interviews. Others feel like warnings. My date with Noah felt like both. We met at a small outdoor cafe where people sat under hanging lights, the kind that make everything look softer at night. It looked harmless. He greeted me politely, pulled my chair slightly like he wanted to look respectful. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. He asked about my day, I asked about his. Nothing strange. Then like a switch, his tone shifted. He asked how active I was on social media. It sounded like a casual question, so I answered honestly. I said I use it here and there, mostly to stay in touch with friends, post random things, nothing serious. He didn't smile or nod. He leaned forward slowly, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine like he was about to confront something. He said women who use social media too much are desperate for attention and cannot be trusted. He said it in a calm voice, like he was stating a fact rather than an opinion. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was joking or exaggerating. He wasn't. He went on to explain his belief that any woman who posted photos online was trying to be seen by other men. He said real relationships require full privacy, and that posting your life online meant you were performing for an audience. He didn't ask me how I used it. He just assumed the worst and spoke like I had already failed some test. I felt the air get heavier around us, even though nothing in the environment changed. People around us were laughing, scrolling their phones freely, taking selfies without a thought, and here I was, being examined like holding an Instagram account meant I was a liability. He said if I wanted something serious with him, I would have to delete all my accounts. Not slow down, not post less, delete. Completely. He said a woman with online presence is a walking invitation for trouble. He said no real man tolerates a partner who advertises herself to strangers. He didn't flinch or soften the wording. He used the word advertises like existing online was the same as asking for validation. I sat there, stunned, realizing this wasn't a conversation. It was an ultimatum delivered politely. He continued, saying that relationships fall apart because women need constant attention from online strangers, and that true loyalty is proven by silence. Silence. He believed affection should be private, and women who crave any form of visibility are empty. He stared at me like he was waiting for me to thank him for showing me the right way to live. Every sentence he spoke had this rehearsed tone, like he delivered the speech before. Maybe to others. Maybe to everyone he dates, like he had a checklist of rules and was ready to walk away the second someone broke one. I tried to change the subject, but he brought it back, again and again. Everything linked back to online presence. Even conversations about hobbies turned into questions about whether I posted those hobbies online. If I said yes, he looked disappointed. If I said no, he nodded like that moment passed his approval. It was never about getting to know me. It was about finding signs of what he considered disloyalty. He said loyalty is proven through restriction. He spoke like privacy meant erasing yourself. The street behind him glowed with phone screens. People taking photos, recording videos, capturing moments with friends. Normal stuff, but his gaze followed them like he was watching a problem. He said social media ruined women's ability to commit. He said if I truly wanted a healthy relationship, I would be happy to disappear from online life altogether. He used the word disappear casually, like withdrawal from every platform was just a normal sacrifice. He said deleting everything would show maturity and self-control. He never once considered that I might have a life outside his rules. He acted like my identity existed only in the waiting stage before being shaped by someone like him. I realized then he wasn't warning me. He was inviting me to step into a smaller version of myself, one he could manage, what no one else could see. That was his idea of trust, isolation disguised as love. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just watched him talk while he stared with calm certainty, so sure he held the correct view. When he paused to sip his drink, I picked up my bag and stood up. He looked confused for a second, then his face hardened. He said something about how walking away instead of deleting proved I was attention-seeking. I didn't reply. I turned and walked through the crowd, past people laughing into their phones, past lights reflecting on screens, past strangers living freely without needing approval to exist online. By the time I reached the end of the street, I had already blocked him. Somewhere behind me, he was probably finishing his drink, telling himself he dodged someone too loud, too visible, too uncontrolled. And maybe he'll meet someone else at that same cafe, under those same lights, and give her the same speech about disappearing for love. First dates usually come with basic questions: favorite movies, hobbies, maybe a story about a pet or something stupid someone did at work. They don't usually start with nutritional analysis. That's why meeting Peter felt like walking into a health interview instead of a date. At first, he came across normal online. He talked about fitness like it was a passion, but lots of people do. He sent pictures of his home-cooked meals, gym progress, that typical aesthetic people post to look disciplined. I didn't think much about it. People love showcasing routines. But I didn't realize his love for routine had crossed into obsession. We met in person at a park cafe. He ordered black coffee without even checking the menu and didn't ask what I wanted. He immediately launched into a breakdown of his daily eating schedule. He listed everything: meal times down to the minute, calorie counts, macros, benefits of each spice he used. I nodded politely, thinking it was just small talk. Then he shifted the conversation toward me. He asked what I ate in a day. I gave a casual answer of like cereal or toast, maybe pasta for dinner. He didn't look satisfied. He asked for specifics, exact ingredients, portion sizes. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was exaggerating. He wasn't. He said if this was going to go anywhere, he needed a full 7-day food log from me. He said compatibility isn't about personality, but lifestyle values. He made it sound like I needed to submit a report to qualify. He said he doesn't entertain relationships unless the person is willing to commit to the same fitness discipline. His exact words were discipline in the kitchen equals discipline in life. He said it proudly, like it was a motto. I told him I wasn't going to record everything I ate just to prove something. He stared at me like I said something offensive. He said refusing to track meals meant I was lazy and unserious about health. He said relationships work best when one person leads and the other follows, especially with food. With food, he genuinely believed controlling someone's diet was normal in a relationship. People passed by with sandwiches and ice cream from the park vendors, laughing, living normally. Meanwhile, he looked at their food with visible disgust and then looked back at me like I might be one of them. He asked if I ever ate fast food. I said sometimes. His face changed instantly. He leaned forward with this intense look and said that was a red flag. He called food choices a moral decision. Moral. He talked about fries like they were a crime. He asked again for a breakdown. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, specific times. He said if I really valued my health, I should have no problem listing it. When I refused again, he leaned back, shook his head slowly, and said I was already showing signs of resistance. Signs of resistance. Like diet tracking was the foundation of something bigger he intended to control. He said his ideal partner would eat exactly like him, with no deviations, no cheat meals without permission. Permission. He used that word casually, like asking someone to get approval for eating food is normal. He listed rules he expected in a relationship. No eating after 7 p.m., no drinks with sugar, no bread unless it's made at home with approved ingredients. He said cheat meals are only allowed once a month and only if they both agree. Both agree clearly meant if he approved. I noticed the way he phrased everything. He never said share. He said follow. He said align. He talked like he wanted a trainee, not a partner. Then he said something that made everything snap into focus. He said I had potential if guided correctly. Guided, like he believed he could fix me with enough dietary control. He said people who resist discipline end up average, and he doesn't date average. The air felt heavy at that table, not because he raised his voice, but because every word came out measured, confident, planned. He wasn't emotional. He was certain. I stared at him for a moment, watching how calmly he sipped his black coffee while scanning the area like he was above everyone eating casually around us. I realized then that if someone like him got into your life, they wouldn't just suggest things. They'd monitor. They'd check. They'd correct. They'd turn food into a test of obedience. I stood up. He didn't look confused or surprised. He looked disappointed, like I failed an evaluation. He said exactly, "This is what happens when people can't commit." Like that was his final assessment before filing me mentally under undisciplined. I walked away without replying. As I left, I could still feel his stare on my back. Not angry. Cold. Observing. Judging. Probably already drafting in his head the next set of rules he'd present to the next person, ready to measure them meal by meal until they either broke or submitted. There's something unsettling about when someone looks at you like you're a job vacancy they're trying to fill instead of a person they're trying to know. That's exactly how Robert looked at me. We met at a quiet bistro tucked between clothing stores on a busy street. The kind of place with tiny round tables, warm lighting, and soft music playing like background noise you barely notice. At first, everything felt normal. We sat down, ordered food, and he acted polite. Too polite, like every sentence was carefully approved before he spoke it. The conversation started harmlessly. He asked about my job, my goals, the usual small talk. I mentioned that I enjoyed what I did and that I wanted to build a stable future for myself. The moment I said build, I saw a shift in his eyes. Something shut off, like I had triggered a hidden rule he didn't want broken. He leaned back in his chair slowly, a kind of slow movement that means someone is about to say something they've rehearsed many times before. He told me he was a traditionalist. He said it with pride, like a title, and I waited, trying to figure out what he meant exactly. Then he said he didn't believe women should be working full-time jobs. He said it calmly, like he was stating a basic fact. I thought maybe he was being sarcastic, but his expression stayed flat and serious. He went on describing his version of a serious relationship. In his version, the woman quits her job once things get official. He said a partner's place should be at home, taking care of the man, keeping things comfortable, and being available at all times. Available, that word stuck with me. He made it sound like a service. I told him I had no intention of quitting my job for anyone. I didn't even say it sharply, just firmly. He didn't take that as an answer. He took it as defiance. His friendly tone faded, and he started talking like someone giving a lecture. He said ambition in women causes friction. He said women who are too focused on careers are hard to control. He used that word openly, control. He said he didn't want to fight for authority in his own house. He looked at me like I was a potential problem, like my independence made me a bad investment. He said if we were to move forward, I needed to understand that care work is more valuable than corporate work. He called my job corporate work like it was empty and pointless. He said men work outside, women work inside. He divided life so cleanly in his head, like the world was split into two lanes, and stepping into the wrong one meant chaos. Around us, plates clattered, and other tables buzzed with quiet chatter. People were laughing, passing salt shakers, cutting into their meals. Everything around me looked normal, but the air at our table felt like it had thickened. He didn't ask me if I agreed. He spoke like he assumed I would eventually. Like resistance was just an early stage before acceptance. He spoke slowly, explaining how he wanted his ideal partner to greet him at the door. Meals ready, house silent, everything in order. He described it like a final dream. He listed the things I would need to give up if it got serious. He said personal projects could be hobbies but should never interfere with household duties. He said he didn't want a woman exhausted from work when she should be focused on keeping everything comfortable for him. He spoke about comfort like it was something owed to him by default. He said a woman who spreads herself too thin ends up disrespecting her man. He said if I truly cared about partnership, I would prioritize him above everything else. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at him, trying to figure out how someone could speak so calmly about taking someone's life and folding it into theirs without question. He looked back, waiting, his fingers tapping on the table like he was grading my silence. He finally said he could tell I was ambitious, and that ambition makes women difficult. Difficult. He said it like a flaw. He added difficult to control, as if clarifying the type of difficult he meant. He didn't try to soften it. He didn't flinch after saying it. I realized he wasn't trying to connect. He was recruiting. Looking for someone who would step willingly into the space he carved out, someone who would shrink their life down until it fit neatly under his. He wasn't interested in partnership. He was interested in ownership with a polite voice and a stable setting. I set my fork down, stood up, and told him I was leaving. He didn't stand up. He didn't ask me to stay. He just nodded once like I had confirmed something he already suspected. As I walked out, I didn't feel nervous. I felt aware that someone like him sits in restaurants all the time, waiting patiently, memorizing a script about tradition and care, hoping for someone who hears the word traditional and mistakes it for love. The more I thought about it, the more his words settled into my mind like a dark stain that doesn't fade with time. I'd always prided myself on being independent. I'd spent years building my career, carving out a space for myself in a world that often tried to erase women like me from the narrative. And here was Robert, trying to diminish all that, telling me that my ambition was a problem, that my drive was a hindrance. But what struck me more than anything wasn't just the audacity of his words. It was the way he seemed completely unfazed by them. Like he expected me to nod along, to let his worldview swallow mine whole, and never question it. What made me uneasy wasn't just his beliefs. It was the certainty with which he held them. His vision of a relationship wasn't a partnership, it was a contract. He was looking for someone to sign on the dotted line, to give up parts of themselves in exchange for a home and a steady routine. It was transactional, not relational. And the worst part was that he was convinced that this was the only way to love. I didn't feel sad when I walked away. I felt liberated. Because I knew that there was someone out there who would see me for who I truly was, not as a job vacancy to be filled, but as a person to be loved. Some guys don't date because they want a partner. They date because they're looking for someone to control. Charlie was exactly that, but it took less than 1 hour to see it clearly. We met outside a casual food spot, nothing fancy, just street seating and a row of small plastic tables lined along the pavement. He was already there when I arrived, arms crossed, scanning people who walked past like he was judging the world one stranger at a time. I should have turned around the moment I saw that look, but I told myself not to judge too early. Ironically, judging early would have saved me a night of listening to his twisted speech. We ordered food. He didn't ask what I wanted. He just ordered and told the waiter we'd share. That already felt off, but I didn't say anything. He leaned back in his chair and mentioned that he found modern women tiring. I asked what he meant, thinking maybe he was about to talk about dating apps or something small. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said he couldn't stand independent women. He said it like he was stating a weather report calm and clear. He said women who call themselves independent are exhausting because they don't know their place. He continued, saying too many women try to compete with men as if that's attractive. He spoke slowly, confidently, as if explaining a concept to someone he believed wouldn't understand. He said he preferred women who stay in their role and don't try to act like men. He used that phrase act like men as if having ambition automatically meant leaving femininity behind. I sat there, taking it in, while he talked like a motivational speaker from a completely different timeline. Then he asked about my career. I mentioned my goals casually, the way you do when you're making conversation. He smirked, not impressed, but amused. He said ambition in women is pointless if it doesn't serve a man's mission. He said no man respects a woman who makes her career her identity because that means she's trying to compete instead of support. He used support like it was the only proper direction for a woman's life. The restaurant buzzed around us, cutlery clinking, people laughing loudly at nearby tables, someone dragging a chair across the ground, the usual messy sound of life. But sitting across from Charlie, everything felt quiet, like I was hearing his words louder than anything around us. He spoke without raising his voice, but every line was a quiet hit. He said relationships fall apart when women forget their lane. He said the lane of a woman is beside her man, but never in front of him. Never in front. Those were his exact words. He took a fry from the plate like he had all the time in the world and went on, saying he believed the biggest problem today is girls thinking independence is impressive. He said independence is just pride dressed up to look pretty. He said women who chase independence end up alone, bragging about careers that no one cares about. He didn't laugh when he said it. He meant every word. I realized then that he didn't want a girlfriend. He wanted a follower. Someone quiet, someone easy to direct, someone who could fit into the gap he carved out for the role of woman in his life. I didn't argue. I watched him speak, his eyes locked on me, waiting to see if I would break and agree. That's what he wanted. Agreement. Submission in conversation. He didn't care if I actually believed it. He wanted to hear me say it. He took another bite of food like this was all normal. Like telling someone to abandon their goals to fit into his hierarchy was a reasonable first date request. He listed his expectations slowly like rules carved in stone. A woman should be supportive, quiet when needed, focused on the home, and not obsessed with proving herself. He said men are natural leaders and women look pathetic when they try to lead. The way he said pathetic was sharp but calm. He didn't flinch or backtrack. He believed it wholeheartedly. I noticed the way he looked at other girls passing by. He scanned them, but interested, but calculating. You could tell he mentally sorted every woman he saw into categories, good or ruined. He used that word later too, ruined. He said the moment a woman starts chasing independence, she ruins herself for traditional men. He looked at me with that same sorting gaze, expecting me to either bend or be dismissed. I stood up before he could finish another sentence. He didn't look surprised. He smirked slightly like he thought leaving proved his point about women being emotional. I didn't respond. I walked past other tables, past the lights hanging above the outdoor seating, past the noise of cutlery and laughter that suddenly felt like a world away from that twisted version of tradition he kept repeating like a creed. As I walked down the street, I could still feel the stare on my back, not angry, but judgmental, like he was already writing me off in his head as another one of those girls out of her lane. I blocked his number before I even reached the end of the road, and I knew without looking back that he was probably finishing his meal calmly, convinced that somewhere out there was someone who would sit across from him and nod. There's a moment during some dates where everything suddenly feels staged, like you accidentally stepped into a scripted lecture instead of a real conversation. With Jonathan, that moment hit like a wall. I met him at a casual outdoor seating area next to a small street market. It was busy, but in a soft, harmless way. People browsing stalls, kids dragging parents toward food stands, couples sipping coffee on benches. It felt too normal for anything weird to happen. That's probably why it caught me off guard when it did. We sat down with takeaway coffee and started talking about basic life stuff. He asked about work, I asked about his hobbies, and it all flowed normally. He came across calm, intelligent, articulate in that way some people are when they know how to hold eye contact just long enough to feel attentive. Nothing about him suggested what was coming. Then, marriage got brought up lightly, just as a side comment. I said I wasn't looking to get married anytime soon. I didn't say never. I said not anytime soon. His expression immediately changed. His posture stiffened slightly, eyes narrowing like I had just said something offensive. Then he shifted from conversation mode into what felt like interrogation. He asked me why I wasn't ready. Not curious, more like demanding justification. I said I had things I wanted to focus on first. He cut me off halfway and said that kind of thinking is exactly why modern relationships fail. I blinked, confused. He wasn't just stating a preference. He was stamping a judgment. Then it began. He went a full tirade about how women today are broken by independence and how we think postponing commitment makes us empowered when really it just exposes our emotional immaturity. He called it emotional immaturity like he was diagnosing a disorder. He said all women secretly want marriage and children, and that any woman who denies that is lying to herself to seem strong. Every sentence came out like an accusation wrapped in false concern. The street around us carried on with life. Market sellers calling out deals, footsteps crossing cobblestone, people laughing nearby. Meanwhile, at that small table, Jonathan was dissecting my life choices like they were flaws on a blueprint. He said if I wasn't ready to marry, I was wasting his time. He said relationships are about moving toward a clear goal, and that if I wasn't marriage-minded, then I was just playing games. He used the phrase playing games like I was intentionally leading him on by simply existing without a wedding date planned. He didn't stop there. He said women who delay marriage end up bitter and alone because they choose careers and freedom thinking it fulfills them. But deep down, they're just scared of commitment. Scared of commitment. That's how he spun it. He twisted my answer into a psychological weakness he believed he could analyze and correct. He said I needed to get my priorities straight and realize that love comes with responsibility. Responsibility, in his mind, meant marriage early and children soon after. He said it flatly, like reciting a schedule. Every time I tried to speak, he raised his hand slightly in a dismissive gesture like he was pausing a presentation, not a conversation. It felt like sitting through a monologue I didn't sign up for. He kept saying we as in women. We as in a general group he had already decided I belonged to. He lumped me into that group without hesitation, using phrases like you girls nowadays, talking like he had the world figured out and everyone else was walking around confused. I looked around at people passing by, wondering if anyone else could hear the way he was talking. If they could hear how he talked about marriage like a finishing line he expected women to sprint toward without question. He talked like delay meant failure. He looked me straight in the eye and said if I wasn't planning for marriage now, then what was the point of dating at all? He said people who wander through relationships without a timeline are unstable. Unstable. He labeled me unstable because I said I wasn't rushing legally binding commitment with someone I barely knew. The more he spoke, the more detached he sounded, like he wasn't even talking to me. He was talking in a version of me he created instantly when I said I wasn't in a rush to get married. In his head, that meant I was damaged. He didn't see me as a person making an individual choice. He saw me as part of a social trend. He felt obligated to correct or condemn. I realized then that he didn't want a partner. He wanted someone who fit a timeline. Someone ready to slot into his life plan without hesitation. Someone who would nod and say, yes, I agree, marriage now, children soon, priorities aligned. Anything else meant brokenness. I didn't argue back. I didn't give him that energy. I stood up calmly while he was mid-sentence and said I was leaving. He looked more annoyed than surprised. Not hurt, not confused, just annoyed that his lecture didn't land the way he planned. As I walked away, he called after me, saying that I would understand one day when I grew up. Those were his last words to me. Understand when I grew up. Like maturity meant becoming exactly like him. I blocked his number as soon as I turned the corner. Somewhere behind me, Jonathan was probably finishing his coffee, convincing himself he was right, ready to deliver the same speech to someone else who dares to say they're not in a rush to stand at an altar. There's this moment on a date when you realize you're not just having a conversation. You're being told what kind of person you're expected to become if you stay. With Patrick, that moment came fast. I sat across from him in a quiet diner that smelled like coffee and fried food, thinking this would be just another average meetup where you talk about random hobbies and see if there's any spark. He had that confident posture people use when they believe they're the main character in every room. I didn't think much of it at first. Lots of people act a little extra on first dates, but then, 20 minutes in, everything shifted. He leaned back in his seat, crossed his arms, and said something like he wanted to get straight to the point because he didn't like wasting time. He said women these days are naturally manipulative. He said they play games, test men, trap them emotionally, and that's why men need to keep control if they don't want to get played. He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He said it like he was explaining a survival rule. I'd waited for a hint of sarcasm or maybe some tone that meant he was exaggerating. There was none. He was dead serious. He talked like he was teaching me something. He said when men lose control, women take advantage. He said relationships only work when women understand their place and don't challenge leadership. Leadership. That was the word he used. He said men are wired to lead and women are wired to follow, and that any woman who tries to stand equal only creates chaos. He used that word like equality was something dangerous. The diner around us looked so normal. A couple in the corner sharing fries, a waiter wiping a table, someone laughing near the counter. Everything around me was calm, ordinary. But at our table, it felt like the temperature dropped. Patrick's eyes never broke contact. He said women ruin relationships when they get too comfortable and start thinking they know better than men. He said respect means acceptance of hierarchy. He used that exact word, hierarchy. He didn't ask for my opinion. He didn't care. He continued on like a lecturer, listing examples like he rehearsed this. He said his past relationships failed because the girls he dated didn't know how to follow direction. He called it direction instead of control, like that softened it. He said men need to guide. He said women who resist guidance end up bitter. The way he spoke, it was clear he believed women who push back against his rules aren't just disagreeing, they're broken. I sat still while he talked, listening, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear just how far he'd go. He said loyalty comes when a woman understands that her role is to support, not to question. He described questioning as disrespect. He used respect like it was something only earned through submission. He even listed behaviors he considered disrespectful. Things like disagreeing too strongly, having too many male friends, making decisions without informing him. He said informing like he expected reports. What made it disturbing wasn't volume or anger. It was the calm delivery. He didn't yell or sound emotional. He sounded organized, like he had created a system in his head for how relationships should be and was now interviewing me to see if I could fit the role. He kept using phrases like women always try to take control quietly and you have to shut that down early. Shut that down. He said that slowly, like a warning disguised as advice. I realized he wasn't searching for a partner. He was searching for someone to manage. Someone who wouldn't argue. someone who would nod and accept his rules like they were scripture. He said women who don't follow structure end up alone because no man will tolerate rebellion. Rebellion. That's what we call free thought. He didn't just want agreement. He wanted internal obedience. The worst part was how normal he looked while saying all this. He wasn't sweaty or nervous or angry. He was composed, sipping his drink like this was just a casual conversation. He looked like the kind of guy people would call polite. That's what made it unsettling. The danger wasn't loud. It was clean and steady and wrapped in the language of tradition and logic. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the debate he was clearly ready for. I just stood up slowly when he paused to breathe and said I had to go. He didn't ask why. He just stared like he was already ranking my behavior in his head, like leaving proved something to him. Maybe in his mind, I failed the obedience test. He didn't say anything. He just watched me walk out, his expression blank, like marking a file as rejected. I left the diner without looking back, the smell of coffee and fried food clinging to my clothes as I stepped into the cold air. Within seconds of closing the door behind me, the noise of normal life came rushing back. Cars, distant voices, wind. The further I walked, the more that Booth felt like a trap I narrowly got out of. I blocked him before I even reached the end of the street. Someone like him doesn't argue when someone leaves. They wait for the next one who doesn't. Some people talk like they're trying to impress you. Others talk like they're trying to scare you without even realizing it. Stephen was the second type. When I met him online, he came across like one of those harmless, funny guys who send memes and ask how your day was without sounding clingy. He had just the right balance of casual and interested. After so many dry conversations with people who don't know how to hold a proper interaction, that felt refreshing. I agreed to meet him again after a decent first date. I didn't expect the shift that was waiting on the second one. We met at a quiet bar with dim lighting and booths tucked into corners. He sat across from me, relaxed, smiling like someone who isn't in a rush to reveal anything too serious. For the first half, we talked about random stuff, city life, annoying coworkers, weird online interactions. He made good eye contact, laughed at the right moments, and seemed in control of the mood. Then, out of nowhere, he shifted the topic like he had been waiting to bring it up. He leaned forward and said something weirdly casual. He said he believed in paying attention to cycles. I thought he meant patterns in life or habits or something harmless like that. Then he clarified. He said he keeps track of women's menstrual cycles because it's smart to know when someone is most emotional or vulnerable. He spoke slowly, proudly, like he thought this was an impressive skill. I froze for a second, trying to process what I just heard. He wasn't saying it as a joke. His expression didn't change. He said it like he was sharing a piece of advice. He explained that most guys don't pay attention, and that's why they struggle in relationships. He said timing is everything, and that knowing when hormones shift gives him an advantage. An advantage. He used that word like he was planning strategy, not building a connection. He said it helps him make the right moves at the right time and avoid conflict. He used phrases like emotional windows and optimal timing. He sounded like someone describing a schedule rather than a person. As he talked, I realized he wasn't just hypothetically discussing it. He did this. He said he's dated multiple girls and always made mental notes, and sometimes even marked it in his phone so he wouldn't forget. My skin crawled, but he didn't notice. He kept going, talking about how it makes relationships smoother because he knows when to push certain conversations and when to pull back. He said men who don't track these things are careless. He called it commitment. He said it shows dedication to understanding a partner. Around us, the bar felt distant. Other people laughed, ordered drinks, lived normally. Meanwhile, he was explaining how tracking biological schedules of the women he dates made him feel powerful. He didn't say the word powerful, but everything about how he spoke implied it. He said being prepared is attractive and that most guys don't understand the importance of control. I noticed how that word slipped through control. It wasn't about care. It was about control disguised as attentiveness. He even asked casually when my cycle was, like it was a normal second date question. He asked if I used an app for tracking and if I'd be willing to share it so he could stay updated. My throat tightened. He said it so softly, with that same smile, like sharing such personal information should be natural if I wanted something real. He framed refusal as a lack of trust. He said couples should have no secrets. He used that line like a key he expected to unlock something. I didn't answer. I just stared at the table, feeling every second stretch out. He continued talking, filling the silence like he didn't notice the shift in energy. He said knowing someone's most vulnerable days helps deepen the bond and avoid unnecessary friction. He used the word vulnerable more than once. Every time he said it, his tone stayed calm, but something in his eyes looked calculating. He said vulnerability is when people show their true selves, and timing an emotional moment right makes things easier. I stood up. I didn't wait for him to finish his sentence. I grabbed my bag and said I was leaving. He didn't react with confusion or anger. Instead, he nodded slowly like he understood, like this was a possible outcome he had already accounted for. That look bothered me more than anything he said. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone marking an observation in his mental log before preparing for the next attempt with someone else. I walked out of the bar, the music and laughter fading behind me. When I got outside, the cold air snapped me back into my body. I blocked his number right there on the sidewalk without waiting for whatever follow-up message he had ready. I could almost imagine what it would have said, some calm, logical explanation wrapped in fake concern. Dates are supposed to be awkward, maybe even disappointing. They're not supposed to feel like stepping into someone's data collection scheme. Somewhere out there, he's probably still tracking names, dates, patterns, convinced he's doing something intelligent instead of something quietly disturbing. Some dates turn sour slowly, like watching something rot over time. With James, it wasn't slow. It was sudden, like a door slamming shut. I met him outside a restaurant that tried too hard to look classy, all candles and quiet music and fake sophistication. He looked put together, wearing a clean jacket, smiling like he already knew this was going to go well. The first part of the evening was fine. We ordered food, made casual jokes, talked about random things like favorite movies and childhood pets. It felt safe, routine, nothing strange. But then, in the middle of a normal conversation, he leaned back and said there was something important I needed to know if I was serious about dating him. I didn't even know we were at that stage, but he said it like a rule that had to be addressed early. He said he only believed in relationships where the woman stays home and keeps the house in order. He used the phrase keeps the house in order like it was a job title. He talked about it like it was a life plan, not a preference. He said he didn't want a partner with a career. He said women who chase careers end up neglecting their families, and that no man wants to come home to a woman who's tired from work. He didn't ask what my goals were. He didn't care. He spoke like he was reading from a script, confident, assured, explaining his traditional viewpoint like it was a noble thing. He said real fulfillment for a woman comes from being a mother and looking after the house. He used the word real like everything else was fake. I sat there, processing his words, and he kept going, saying if I wanted something outside of that life, he wouldn't be interested in dating me. He said it with no hesitation, like he was informing me of policy. He didn't ask if I agreed. He expected agreement. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a condition. He explained how he wanted his future wife to wake up early, have everything prepared, and be available whenever needed. He said it like he was describing a layout for a house, clean and controlled. Around us, the restaurant continued with its quiet ambience. People clinked glasses, whispered over their meals, and none of them knew that at our table, someone was outlining a job role disguised as a relationship. He watched me with a calm face, waiting. He wanted me to say yes to sign an invisible contract right there. When I said that I had my own career plans, he didn't argue or get upset. Instead, he looked disappointed, like I had just marked myself as unsuitable. He said women these days are distracted by ambition and forget what they were built for. He kept using that phrase, built for, like people are made with specific purposes that can't be changed. He talked about family structure like he had it drawn out in his head, every role assigned. He said he would make the money, and I would manage the home. There was no room in his words for partnership, only control hidden behind the idea of tradition. The longer he spoke, the more I realized he wasn't looking for love. He was looking for compliance. He described his vision in detail. Mornings where breakfast was ready before he woke up. Evenings where the house was spotless and silent. Weekends where everything revolved around his routine. He even mentioned that if I ever wanted to work, it should only be something small from home that didn't interfere with his expectations. The way he said interfere made it sound like my independence was a potential disruption rather than a part of who I am. I noticed then that he wasn't asking. He was mourning. He phrased everything like a calm explanation, but underneath it was a demand. He said he believed in order and that modern relationships failed because roles were blended. He said he wanted purity and structure. Purity. He said mixing roles creates confusion and resentment, and that women who want to do everything end up doing nothing right. Each sentence felt like being pushed slowly into a box, the walls getting closer with every word. He drank his water like everything he said was logical, normal. He didn't flinch. He looked proud, like this belief made him strong. I realized then that he had probably had this conversation many times. I wasn't the first person sitting across from him hearing these terms lay out like a contract. I was just next in line, and he was ready to move on instantly if I didn't agree. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded politely, letting him talk while my mind was already gone from that table. The candles flickered on the surface of the table, and I watched the flame dance, trying to tune out his voice. He kept talking, describing this life like it was a dream. To me, it sounded like a cage with soft walls. One of those cages people step into because it looks clean from the outside. When the bill came, he didn't ask if I wanted to split. He said paying was his responsibility, just like decisions would be. He said that proudly, like it was a gift. When we walked outside, he asked if I needed a ride. I said no. He nodded once, like accepting a failed negotiation, and said he hoped I would think about what he said. I didn't answer. I walked away from that restaurant without looking back. I didn't need to. I could still hear his voice in my head, listing rules under the disguise of tradition, confident that one day someone would agree and call it love. There's something strange about how some people approach dating like they're trying to recruit you into a belief system rather than actually get to know you. Adam was exactly that. From the moment I met him, something about his energy felt too confident, like he wasn't here to see if we clicked, but to convince me of something. We met outside a small restaurant that had fairy lights wrapped around the entrance and soft music spilling out from the inside. It looked like the type of place meant for easy conversation. That assumption died in the first 5 minutes. We sat down, menus open, barely even settled, when he leaned forward with a grin and asked how many people I had on the side. He didn't say it jokingly. He said it like it was a standard question, like asking someone if they wanted still or sparkling water. I blinked, confused, thinking maybe I misheard. Then he asked again, saying it slower like he thought I didn't understand. He wanted to know if I was into polyamory, how many people I was talking to, and how open I was to expanding my dating pool with him included. I said I wasn't interested in that. I said it calmly, thinking that would be the end of it. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a full-blown lecture disguised as a date. He smiled like he found my answer amusing, like I was a child saying something silly. Then he launched into a speech about how traditional dating is outdated and limiting. He said monogamy was a low-tier mindset, and that people who rejected polyamory were closed off and insecure. He said it so casually that it didn't even sound like an insult at first, but the longer he spoke, the clearer it became that in his mind I was behind. He treated my boundary like it was a wrong answer. Throughout the entire evening, he circled back to it over and over. No matter what topic I tried to shift to, he found a way to drag it back to polyamory. I mentioned music, he said polyamory creates more emotional variety. I mentioned travel, he said traveling with multiple partners is better. I asked about his day, he said having several people to come home to makes life more fulfilling. It felt like being trapped in a sales pitch where I was the product and he was trying to convince me to upgrade myself to his worldview. The restaurant around us felt distant. People were laughing at their own tables, waiters moved between candlelit seats, soft clinking of forks and glasses filled the air. Meanwhile, at our table, Adam was going on about how commitment shouldn't be limited to one person and how real strength comes from sharing love widely. He said people who seek exclusive love are clinging to a scarcity mindset. He talked like he read a script from a forum and memorized key phrases to sound enlightened. Every time I disagreed, he didn't accept it. He countered it like a debate. He said I was reacting emotionally instead of logically. He said if I grew more, I'd understand. That phrase kept following me through the night. If you grew more. He made it sound like personal growth meant aligning with his lifestyle. Anything else meant stagnation. He didn't want a real conversation. He wanted agreement. He watched me like he could see the moment my resistance would crack, like he was waiting to witness the moment I had admitted he was right. He started describing his past relationships like case studies. How he introduced girls to polyamory slowly, how some resisted but later thanked him. He spoke like he was proud of converting people away from monogamy. He used the word convert casually, like it wasn't strange to use that for dating. He listed benefits like he was taking features off a product description. More emotional resource distribution. No dependency. Higher romantic efficiency. The way he spoke didn't even sound romantic. It sounded like a systems talk. Halfway through his monologue, I noticed he wasn't asking me anything anymore. He wasn't curious about who I was or what I valued. He only asked questions that led back to his pitch. He said things like, "Don't you want to feel more alive? And don't you think limiting yourself to one person is fear-based?" Each question wasn't actually a question. It was bait wrapped in fake curiosity. I stopped answering after a while. I just nodded or looked away, hoping the silence would make him slow down. It didn't. Sitting there felt like being slowly erased. My boundaries weren't just ignored. They were treated like obstacles he needed to break down. He didn't care about compatibility. He cared about expansion. He saw me as another potential branch in a network he was building, and he genuinely believed he was doing me a favor by inviting me into it. That made the whole thing more unsettling. He wasn't aggressive. He was calm, certain, patient. That quiet confidence made his insistence feel more dangerous than if he was loud. I waited for a pause and his talking stood up, said I had to go. I didn't wait for his reply. I walked straight out into the cold night air, the sound of his voice still rolling behind me and in my mind like a lingering echo. I didn't look back through the restaurant window. I didn't wait to see if he followed. I just kept walking until I couldn't hear the restaurant music anymore and the streetlights ahead felt like distance. Later, before blocking him, I saw one last message come through. It said that I should think deeply before rejecting opportunities, and that closed doors lead to small lives. I blocked him mid-sentence, not even letting the notification finish scrolling. Some people go on dates to see if they connect. People like Adam go to recruit. And maybe right now, he's sitting across from someone else in that same restaurant, smiling confidently, ready to begin his pitch about superior lifestyles all over again. You ever meet someone who seems put together in a way that feels almost too controlled, like every word is measured and rehearsed? That was Ethan. He had that calm, composed way of speaking that makes people think he's mature. When we first met, he spoke about stability and planning like those were his love languages. It sounded responsible at first. He wasn't wild or chaotic. He gave off this energy of someone who had his life in order. And after dealing with plenty of emotionally messy guys, that seemed like a breath of fresh air. I didn't realize order can be just as suffocating as chaos, just in a quieter way. Our second date was at a quiet cafe, tucked behind an old bookshop. We talked about random things, but he kept circling back to money in subtle ways. He asked general questions like what I'd do for work and if I liked it. Normal stuff. I didn't think much about it. People ask those things all the time. He talked a bit about his job too, something finance related, the kind that sounds impressive but vague. He spoke about numbers with excitement like most people talk about their favorite show. It was unusual but not threatening. If anything, I found it funny how seriously he took budgeting. Then the daily messages started, not flirty or thoughtful, structured. That's the only way I can describe them. Each one read like a check-in form. He asked how much I made per year. Not casually, directly. He asked my exact job title. Then he wanted to know how much I spent monthly on food. Then clothes. Then on random things like skincare. He broke down categories like he was filling out a spreadsheet. I thought he was joking. I sent back a laughing message like, haha, very funny. He didn't laugh. He replied saying financial transparency is the foundation of a functional relationship. He said it like he was quoting some rulebook. He said if people were more honest about money, fewer relationships would fail. Then he asked again, word for word, how much do you earn exactly, and what do you usually spend in a month? It felt like being audited instead of dated. I told him I wasn't comfortable sharing that level of detail. He immediately switched tone. He said hiding numbers creates distrust. Hiding. Like not telling a near stranger your salary meant I was concealing something shameful. From that day onward, every morning came with a new question. How much did you spend today on lunch? Did you buy anything this week? How much went into savings? Did you order anything online? Each message had that calm, professional tone, like he genuinely thought this was healthy communication. I tried ignoring a few, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He messaged again, copying the previous question, saying you might not have seen this. Copying, like he had a template ready. I finally told him directly that I don't owe him a financial breakdown of my life. That's when he sent a long paragraph about transparency being tied to loyalty. He said secretive behavior leads to dissection. Dissection. He used that word like talking about cheating, but applied it to grocery spending. He made me feel like not sending him numbers meant I was preparing to betray him. He said couples should know everything about each other's finances so they can plan. We had been on 2 dates. 2. And he spoke like we were signing for a joint mortgage. Every sentence from him after that sounded like a court statement. He said if I couldn't be honest about money, how could I be trusted in anything else? He said financial secrecy is a red flag. Then he asked me again for my salary. Not approximately. Exactly. It wasn't curiosity. It was control. He wanted precision. He wanted to store that data somewhere in his head like a file. He asked how much my bag cost, then my shoes. Then he said it's important to evaluate spending habits early on to decide long-term compatibility. He spoke like he was doing a pre-relationship assessment, marking categories like income potential and financial discipline. The more I refused, the more he framed it like I was failing a trust test. He said open people don't hesitate to share. He said resistance means guilt. Guilt. As if protecting personal information meant wrongdoing. Every message had this slow pressure behind it, like he would keep asking until I broke. It wasn't loud. It was quiet persistence, and that made it more unsettling. People think control shows itself through shouting or anger. Sometimes it shows through calm, logical-sounding questions repeated over and over until your boundaries start to feel unreasonable. I blocked him after he sent a final message saying he couldn't see a future with someone who hides simple details. Simple details. Salary, spending, job ranking. To him, those were basics. It wasn't even about the money. It was about access. He wanted total access really so he could measure me against his system. That's what it was. A system. He didn't want a person. He wanted numbers to evaluate stability, compatibility. He didn't talk about love. He talked about efficiency. Sometimes I think about how many people he might be texting right now, copying and pasting the same questions, waiting to see who answers willingly. He probably calls it being responsible. In reality, it's something else. Something colder. Something that watches instead of connects. And I almost got pulled into it just because it was quiet and neat instead of messy and loud. You know that sinking feeling when someone starts talking and you instantly realize you're sitting across from the kind of person you usually mute online. That's what it was like with Scott. I met him outside a small coffee place, the type with warm lighting and fake plants placed everywhere to make it feel homey. He waved at me with too much enthusiasm, like he was already proud of himself for just showing up. I sat down across from him, coffee in hand, trying to settle into the date mentally, hoping it would at least be tolerable. For the first 10 minutes, it was fine. Basic surface talk, jobs, weather, coffee preference. He talked a bit too loud, but I let it slide. Then, without any lead-up, he shifted in his seat, smirked like he was about to reveal something impressive, and started bragging about his dating history. He didn't talk about connections or funny date stories. He used the word dump like it was an achievement. He said he had high standards and didn't waste time on girls who couldn't meet them. He listed them like a rulebook he followed religiously. He said he doesn't date anyone who gains weight or looks too soft. He used that exact phrase, too soft. He said he doesn't entertain girls with visible marks on their body because it ruins the look. He said he only dates girls with perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect shape. Each time he said perfect, he said it slowly, like he liked the taste for the word. The way he talked about women didn't even sound human. It sounded like he was buying products off a shelf and returning them when they didn't match the label. He called himself strict, like that was a good thing. He leaned back, sipped his drink, and talked about dumping girls for things like their jawline not being as sharp in person or their waist looking different when they weren't posing. He said once he left a date halfway through because the girl had a scar on her arm she didn't mention. The way he said mention made it sound like she had tricked him by existing. He said scars made people look messy. Messy. like the human body is meant to be spotless or else it's a defect. I looked around the cafe while he talked, watching people minding their own business, hearing spoons clink against mugs and the low hum of conversation. It felt surreal that in that normal, cozy setting, someone could casually talk about discarding people like misprinted items. He didn't even sound hateful. That made it worse. He sounded proud. Proud of how fast he cut people off. Proud of how ruthless he could be with his standards. He said most people settle because they don't have discipline, but he did. Discipline. As if empathy is a weakness. He kept glancing at me in between his sentences, not to see my reaction, but to visually check if I still met his criteria as he spoke. It felt like sitting under inspection lights. Every movement felt watched. He scanned my face, my hands, even the way I sat, as if he was storing data in his head. Every time he found something acceptable, he kept talking. That was the worst part, knowing that silence meant temporary approval. One wrong detail, and I could see him mentally filing me under the categories he listed earlier. He said he once stopped seeing a girl because she wore flat shoes on a date instead of heels. He said presentation matters more than personality. Hearing him say personality made me want to laugh because he clearly didn't care about it. He used it like a filler word to cover how shallow his list actually was. He started describing his ideal girl like he was describing the mannequin. He talked about symmetry, proportions, brightness of skin tone in a catalog. Not once did he use words like kind or interesting. Only flawless and worth showing off. The way he talked, it felt like if he could design a person, he would. If that person had even one flaw, he'd return them without hesitation. He wasn't just shallow. He was detached. Detached from the concept of real people having marks and changes in humanity. He said he checks girls in different lighting to see if they still look appealing. He laughed about it like it was clever. He said most girls look different in the morning, and that's when he decides if they're worth keeping. Worth keeping, like he was adopting furniture. I stayed seated because leaving right away felt too obvious, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking he made a point. So I just stared at him while he spoke, taking note of how empty his expressions looked when he said these things. He kept adjusting his watch, fixing his hair, checking his reflection in the cafe window between sentences. He didn't look at me like a date. He looked at me like an evaluation subject. At one point, he said people accuse him of being harsh, but he said his standards keep him from wasting time. He said if girls can't keep up, they shouldn't apply. Apply. Like this was a job interview for a role he created. His words had this weird confidence that made the whole thing feel rehearsed, like he had practiced explaining his philosophy before. Like somewhere in his head, he thought of this as lifestyle discipline instead of cruelty. I waited for a pause in his talking, stood up, grabbed my drink, and said nothing. He didn't ask why I was leaving. He just crossed his arms and nodded like I had failed the test. I walked out of that cafe faster than I ever have in my life, feeling like I needed to get as far away from that table as possible, like the air around him was contaminated with judgment. I blocked him the second I stepped outside. As I walked past the window, I glanced in and saw him scrolling on his phone already, probably lining up the next person to interview against his perfection scorecard. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked ready to repeat the process again. There's something so awkward about first dates in bars. The lighting is always too dim, the music too loud for actual conversation, and yet everyone acts like it's the perfect place to get to know someone. I met Ryan there, sitting at a high table near the back, already with a drink in his hand like he had been rehearsing how to look relaxed. I sat down and instantly felt like I had walked into a performance, like he wanted to come across confident without making it too obvious. At first, it felt normal. We talked about random stuff, work, movies, the usual filler talk people do while pretending they're not analyzing each other. After a couple of drinks, his questions got more personal, but not in a deep way. More like he was trying to get under my skin without making it look intentional. Then he suddenly leaned forward and asked what my cued-off age was for dating younger men. I thought he was joking, so I laughed it off. But he didn't laugh. He kept a straight face, waiting. I asked why that mattered, but he insisted I answer. He said it like it was a logical question, like everyone should have a set number ready. I told him I wasn't interested in dating younger guys. That should have ended it. Instead, he shifted his tone into something smug. He made a comment about how women my age usually say that before realizing their options shrink. Options shrink. He said it casually, sipping his drink like he had just pointed out a weather update. I felt my stomach tighten, not because I believed him, but because of how calculated the comment sounded. He used age like a weapon, casually thrown into conversation to see how I'd react. From that moment, the entire vibe changed. He kept coming back to the topic of age over and over, like he had been waiting for a chance to talk about it. He said games like dating get harder the older you get because men start losing interest in girls who are past their prime. He looked at me directly when he said past their prime. That phrase didn't even make sense for someone in their late 20s, but he said it like it was undeniable truth. He used words like prime and youth like he was reading from a script about expiration dates. Every time I tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, he brought it back. He started asking questions like, how old do you think you'll be? Will guys stop messaging you online? Or do you ever worry about time running out? He wasn't curious. He was provoking. He wanted me to show insecurity so he could feed off it. I could see it in his eyes. He stared the way people stare at digital countdown timers, waiting for the moment numbers hit 0. The bar around us kept moving, people laughing, music thumping steadily. But at that table, it felt like time had slowed. He kept analyzing me like I was an object in some time-sensitive deal. At one point, he even said women don't like to admit when they're aging out of attention, so they cling to the idea that personality matters more than looks. The way he said aging out made me feel like he was talking about spoiled food. His tone stayed calm, almost sympathetic, like he was giving me life advice instead of insulting me. Then he leaned closer and said men have a wider range of dating options as they get older, but women don't. He said men can choose younger girls if they want more excitement, but women eventually have to settle for what's left. Each line was delivered smoothly, like this wasn't offensive but just practical information. The worst part was how sure he looked, like he genuinely believed he was right, and I was just someone who hadn't accepted reality yet. I stopped engaging. I didn't argue or defend myself. I just watched him talk, watched how comfortable he was reducing me to a timeline. He didn't see me as a person. He saw an age bracket. He looked at me the same way someone looks at something they plan to judge on a scale. The longer he spoke, the more detached he sounded. It wasn't even about me. It was about the idea of me, a woman in her late 20s. He treated me like a symbol of the stage in life he looked down on. Eventually, I stood up. I didn't finish my drink. He didn't ask why I was leaving. He just smirked and said something about me proving his point. Proving his point. Like walking away from his lecture about my expiry date confirmed something in his twisted logic. I didn't reply. I walked past crowds of people enjoying their night, laughter echoing, drinks clinking, everything loud and alive, while that table behind me felt like a dead zone where time was only used to measure worth. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I kept walking until the music from the bar faded out completely. My phone buzzed once. I didn't look. I already knew it would be him sending one last comment, some line about reality checks or wasted time. I blocked his number without opening it. Somewhere in that bar, he probably stayed, scanning faces, picking out who looked young enough to feed his ego. And maybe right now he's leaning across another table, asking someone else about their cutoff age, waiting for that moment where his comment lands like a quiet slap. I just happened to be the one sitting in front of him when he needed an audience. There's always that one topic that flips a date from normal to something you wish you never agreed to. With Chris, it happened faster than I expected. We met at an outdoor food spot near a canal where people sit on benches with takeaway boxes and watch boats pass by. It felt laid back, breezy, nothing tense. We grabbed food, found a spot by the railing, and everything felt like it was going fine. He asked normal questions, laughed at the right times, even looked like the kind of guy who listens instead of waiting for his turn to talk. For a moment, I actually thought, all right, this might not be a disaster. The conversation drifted naturally into the topic of future plans. He mentioned wanting a house one day, maybe moving somewhere quiet. I nodded, making polite comments, but not really attaching myself to anything. Then he said he wanted kids young so he could be a fun parent. I shrugged and casually said I wasn't in a rush to have kids and that I didn't even know if I wanted them at all. I said it lightly, not like a bold statement, just an honest thought thrown into conversation. That one sentence shifted everything. His whole energy changed. He went from relaxed to intense in an instant. His smile faded, and he leaned forward like he had just detected a flaw he needed to correct. He called it selfish. That exact word. He said not wanting kids meant I lacked purpose. He said a woman's purpose is naturally tied to motherhood. He didn't ask why I felt that way or if there was more behind my thought. He just stamped it with judgment right away like a label on a file. I thought it would pass after a moment. Maybe he'd say his piece and move on. But he didn't. He stayed on it like a dog locked on a scent. He said people who avoid responsibility are scared of meaning. He didn't even speak like he was debating. He spoke like he was diagnosing. His tone was that slow, deliberate way people talk when they believe they're blessing you with truth. He said choosing not to have kids was unnatural and against what life intended. He repeated the word purpose again and again like he was trying to make it sink into my head by force. Around us, people laughed, walked by, lived their lives without knowing that at that small bench someone was getting lectured like they had confessed to a crime. He didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. The calmness made every word heavier. He spoke about legacy, bloodlines, continuing tradition. None of it sounded emotional. It sounded scripted, like he had said this before to someone else and perfected it. He referred to motherhood like it was a role that needed to be fulfilled, not a choice. At some point, I stopped responding completely. Anything I did say just opened another part of his speech. If I said I had goals I wanted to focus on, he called it distraction. If I said not everyone finds joy in the same things, he called it denial. He twisted every reply into proof that I was lost. He kept his eyes locked on me, analyzing every reaction like he wanted to catch a moment of surrender. He said women who reject motherhood are empty later in life. He said emptiness was the price of ignoring nature. The food beside me went cold while he kept talking. Boats passed behind us, people's voices echoed across the canal, and it felt like I was stuck in some forced seminar on roles and duty. He spoke in circles, repeating certain words like purpose, womanhood, legacy, until they didn't even feel like real words anymore. He said one day I'd wake up and realize I had wasted my best years running from what I was meant to do. He spoke like he had the timeline of my life figured out, like I was a character in a story he already knew the ending to. His attitude wasn't passion. It was control disguised as concern. He looked at me like he was disappointed, like I had failed some invisible test. I noticed people passing by glancing in our direction, maybe because of how intense he looked, leaning forward, hands clasped, eyes fixed like he was holding an intervention instead of sitting on a casual first date. I didn't speak again. I just sat silently, waiting for a point where he would breathe long enough for me to say I was leaving. Eventually, I stood up. He paused mid-sentence and looked at me like I was being dramatic. I said I had to go. He sighed that I was making a mistake. I didn't argue. I didn't explain further. I just walked away along the canal while he stayed seated, shaking his head like he was disappointed in me for not accepting his truth. I could feel his stare on my back until I turned the corner and he was out of sight. That night, before blocking him, I saw a message come through. He wrote a long paragraph about how he hoped I would grow out of my selfish mindset and that he believed I still had time to understand what life was really about. He said he was willing to try again if I showed signs of maturity. Signs of maturity. As if having a different view meant I was unfinished, waiting to be corrected. I blocked him without replying. Somewhere out there, he's probably still sitting across from new people, waiting for them to say something he can latch onto, ready to deliver that same speech about purpose like a drill he knows by heart. I just happen to be the latest audience. There's this strange rush that comes with talking to someone online who actually seems to get you. David had that effect. Every message felt easy, like we skipped the awkward small talk phase that usually drags on. He had this confident tone that made conversations feel exciting, like he knew exactly what to say without trying too hard. So when he asked to meet up, I didn't hesitate. I thought maybe this one could actually be normal. That stupid kind of hope people get after scrolling through too many dry chats. We met at a lounge-style cafe that had dim lights and low music, the type of place where people sit on couches instead of chairs and act like they're in a movie scene. I spotted him leaning against the counter, relaxed, smiling like he already knew the date would go well. And at first it actually did. He asked good questions, made jokes at the right moments, looked at me like he was genuinely interested. Nothing about his energy felt off. The air wasn't tense, it was comfortable. Halfway through, we moved outside to sit on the patio. The breeze was cold, but not enough to ruin the moment. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, and said something about relationships being simple if both people understood their roles. I asked what he meant, still thinking it was just a philosophical conversation. He said monogamy works only when passion stays alive, and that as long as the woman keeps things exciting, he stays loyal without any issue. He said it casually, like stating a basic life rule. At first, I thought I misunderstood. I waited for him to explain further, thinking maybe he just phrased it badly. He didn't correct it. In fact, he made it clearer. He said we should start casually so I could show if I had that spark that keeps things from getting boring. He said most girls lose energy after a while and start acting comfortable, and that's when he checks out. The way he said it wasn't even threatening. It was worse. It was matter of fact. Like this system worked for him and I just had to adapt. He talked about loyalty like it was a reward. He said monogamy is a fair trade if the woman maintains that excitement. It wasn't about mutual effort. It was a condition. A contract without paper. He didn't say what he would bring into the relationship besides his presence. He just stated that staying fun and entertaining was my responsibility if I wanted something serious. He made seriousness sound like a prize I had to earn. The more he talked, the more I realized he wasn't just expressing a preference. He was laying out expectations. He said he wasn't into boring routines and didn't want a girl who settles into comfort. Comfort to him meant failure. He said if I wanted to keep his focus, I'd have to avoid ever getting too normal. His entire view of relationships sounded like a constant performance test. And he said it all with a calm smile, looking right at me like he already placed me in that role. My drink sat untouched on the table while he explained how he views dating like a game of consistency. He said excitement keeps men loyal, and that if a woman stops trying, she shouldn't be surprised when attention goes elsewhere. He used words like challenge and energy like they were core requirements. Listening to him made me realize this wasn't a conversation. It was an evaluation. He was telling me the rules before deciding if I could stay in his life. He leaned closer then, lowering his voice slightly like he was offering valuable advice. He said girls mess up by thinking love guarantees loyalty. He said loyalty should be earned repeatedly through effort. He wasn't asking my opinion. He was instructing me. It wasn't about partnership. It was about maintenance of his excitement. We walked back inside for a bit because the air got colder, but the vibe had shifted completely. Everything he said from that point on sounded filtered through those conditions he set. Every question he asked me sounded like he was scoring my answers based on how entertaining or passionate I seemed. He complimented me randomly in between comments about how easily people become boring if they don't keep trying. The word boring came out of his mouth like a threat every time. I excused myself early. I didn't want to sit there pretending like this was still a normal date. He didn't seem bothered. He just said casually that we could keep things light and see if I held his interest. Held his interest? Like that was my task now. Like from that moment on, any interaction would be measured on some scale only he understood. Later that night, I got a message from him. It wasn't sweet or emotional. It was short. He said he liked my energy and hoped I could keep it up because consistency matters to him. He added a winking emoji at the end, like he just made a charming comment instead of an unsettling promise. Reading it made my chest feel weird, not scared, just aware. Aware that he genuinely believed excitement was something I had to maintain or be replaced. I blocked him without replying. The weird thing wasn't what he said. It was how normal he made it sound. Like a woman constantly proving her worth wasn't disturbing, but just logical. I keep thinking about how confident he looked while explaining those rules. Like he had done this many times and never saw anything wrong with it. Somewhere out there, he's probably getting the same speech as someone else, waiting to see if they nod along and agree to keep the passion alive like a yearly subscription that needs renewing. First dates are supposed to be awkward in a normal way, like overthinking your outfit or wondering if there will be weird silences. I didn't expect mine with Alex to go off the rails within the first minute. I barely even got to sit down before he started talking. I met him outside a small diner near the bus station, the kind with old neon signs and plastic menus. He didn't say hi normally. He just looked me up and down like he was scanning me, then launched straight into a rant like he had been holding it in all day waiting for someone to unload it on. He said without any pause that he hated how women dress these days. He said every time he went out, he saw girls wearing what he called attention clothes. He didn't call it fashion. He called it desperate. He spoke like he was listing crimes. We hadn't even ordered food yet. I thought maybe he was joking, trying to be edgy in a bad humor kind of way. But his face stayed serious. He talked with this cold certainty that made my stomach twist. The worst part was how casual he sounded, like this was just small talk. He kept going, saying women who dressed a certain way didn't respect themselves and deserved whatever disrespect came their way. The way he said deserved made my skin crawl. He spoke like he truly believed outfits determined worth. I tried to stay calm and said I didn't agree with that. I didn't even argue. I just expressed disagreement. That was enough to trigger something in him. He leaned forward with this annoyed look and started lecturing me like I was a kid who didn't understand how the world worked. The diner felt too bright in that moment. The fluorescent lights reflected on the silver napkin holders and made everything look harsh. I could hear the sound of plates clattering from the kitchen and someone laughing at a nearby booth. All these normal sounds felt far away while he kept talking. He said modesty was the only way to be respected. He said women who showed skin were asking for it. Those exact words. He said asking for it like it was a logical conclusion. His tone never raised. That made it worse. He didn't sound angry. He sounded convinced. I looked around hoping someone would interrupt, maybe the waiter arriving with menus or something. But no one came. It felt like being trapped in a booth with someone who thought he was a philosopher when really he was just slowly revealing what he believed about half the population. He kept speaking in long sentences, breaking down his beliefs like a lecture. He even used phrases like scientifically women should know their value is tied to how they present themselves. He spoke in a way that made it clear he wasn't talking to me. He was talking at me. Every time I tried to speak, he talked over me. If I even made a small point, he cut me off like he couldn't stand hearing anything that didn't match his view. He started throwing in examples, pointing to random people walking outside the window and making comments about their outfits like he was proving a case. Each comment was laced with judgment. He looked at strangers and rated their worth out loud based on clothes. It made me realize he didn't just believe these things. He lived by them. I started noticing his eyes weren't just looking. They were scanning, judging, calculating. Every time a girl walked past outside, he made a remark under his breath, like, see, that's exactly what I mean. He made those remarks to me like I would agree eventually if he repeated it enough. The way he said it made me feel like he genuinely believed disagreement was just a temporary phase before I accepted his logic. I stayed seated longer than I should have, frozen by how surreal it felt. It wasn't a normal argument about different opinions. It was like sitting with someone who had a clear set of rules about how women should act and dress, and genuinely believed punishment was justified if those rules weren't followed. The longer he spoke, the clearer it became that he didn't see me as a person with autonomy. He saw me as someone who needed correction if I didn't fit the image he approved of. He circled back to me eventually, his eyes landing on my jacket, my shoes, everything. He said it wasn't too bad, but that I could do better. Better meant covering more, speaking less, listening to guidance. He used the word guidance like he was a mentor and not some guy in a booth ranting about strangers. He said if this went anywhere, he expected certain standards. Standards meaning control. I didn't finish the drink I ordered. I stood up mid-sentence while he was still talking. I didn't argue or explain. I just left. I walked straight out of the diner, past the glowing neon sign and into the cold air outside. I could still hear his voice in my head, that flat tone that made everything sound like a rule, not a thought. I didn't look back to see if he followed. I just kept walking until the diner lights were far behind me. Later that night, I blocked his number without answering his message that said we needed to continue the discussion next time so I could learn. Learn? That's what he called it. As if understanding him was some kind of lesson I needed. Sometimes I wonder how many other girls sat in that same booth before me, listening to him talk like that, thinking it was just a rough start to a date before realizing it wasn't a start. That was the whole thing. There's this weird thing that happens when someone compliments you too much. At first it feels good, like maybe they genuinely see you in a nice way. But if you listen closely, sometimes those compliments have sharp edges hidden inside them. That's what it was like with Mark. I met him through mutual friends at a small gathering. He wasn't the loud type, more of a quiet observer with that polite smile people find comforting. He spoke gently, didn't interrupt, actually looked like he listened when I talked. Everyone around him said he was one of the good ones. So I let my guard down before I even really knew him. The first few times we hung out, he complimented everything. He said I had a natural look that didn't need effort. He said I had a good face shake for certain hairstyles. I didn't think much of it. People comment on looks all the time, but then it didn't stop. It became part of every conversation. We'd be sitting in a cave, and instead of talking about anything real, he would point out how I'd look better if I styled my hair a certain way, or how a different color would suit my skin tone more. At first, I laughed it off, but he wasn't joking. He said it like he was giving valuable advice, like he was helping me unlock some potential I wasn't using. Then he started sending me screenshots of outfits he thought I should wear. Not just random outfits, but full looks with notes about why they would work on me. He sent messages saying things like, if you dress like this, people would pay more attention to you. The way he said it made it sound like attention was something I should be chasing. It wasn't just style suggestions. It was like he was building an upgraded version of me in his head. One time, we met up to get food, just a simple hangout. As soon as he saw me, his eyes scanned my clothes in silence before he even said hello. Then he said I had good features, but I wasted them by wearing things that made me blend in. The word wasted stuck in my mind. He made it sound I was doing something wrong by not looking a certain way. He said people with potential shouldn't settle for looking average. It was such a backhanded thing to say, but he delivered it with a calm tone, like he genuinely believed he was helping. I remember sitting there holding my drink, feeling small without even knowing why. He talked more about it over the next few meetups. He pointed out food choices too, telling me how eating cleaner would make me look sharper. He didn't call me unattractive. He just made it sound I was almost there, like with a bit of effort, I could cross some invisible line into being noticeable. He made me question things I never cared about, like if my hair made my face look rounder, or if certain clothes made me look too casual. It wasn't aggressive. It was slow, almost gentle. That made it worse. Eventually, he said he wanted to take me shopping. He said he had an eye for aesthetics and that with the right wardrobe, I could look incredible. He offered to pay. He said it like it was some kind of gift, like he was doing me a favor. The idea of walking around stores while he judged everything I tried on made my stomach twist. I said I didn't need a new wardrobe, but he insisted, saying he had already set aside money for it. The way he said it made it clear he had planned this ahead. He said if I let him, he could transform everything about how I present myself. He used the word transform like I was some unfinished project he wanted to complete. The worst part was how easily people would probably say it's flattering. Someone offering to buy you clothes, someone who pays attention to your style. It sounds harmless when you say it out loud. But standing there listening to him list everything that needed changing, I didn't feel flattered. I felt like I was disappearing. It was like he wasn't looking at me anymore, just some version of me that only existed in his head. One day he sent a long message with a list. Actual bullet points of things I should change. Hair, clothes, diet, posture. He even suggested certain facial expressions I should avoid because they made me look less confident. It wasn't even about liking me. It was about molding me. His compliments at the start were just opening moves to soften me before the critique came. He said if I trusted him, he could bring out a better version of me. Better, according to him. I remember just staring at that message, that list of corrections, and realizing nothing I did naturally would ever be enough for him. He didn't want me. He wanted control, wrapped in the language of self-improvement. Everything he said was coded in this fake caring tone, but underneath it was pure dissatisfaction, not just with how I looked, but with who I was without his influence. I blocked him after that last message. No explanation, just done. Sometimes I think about how subtle it all started, how easy it would have been to ignore the weird comments and just go along with it. He never yelled, never insulted me directly. He just slowly scraped away at my self-image piece by piece. People like that don't need to be allowed to ruin someone. They just need time and quiet access. There's always that weird build-up before a first date where you convince yourself it might actually go well. With Chris, I kept telling myself not to expect anything serious, just a walk and some talking, nothing heavy. He suggested a walking trail just outside town that people usually go to with dogs and coffee cups. It felt a low-effort kind of date, which I liked because it meant less pressure. When I got there, the sky was overcast and the air felt cool in that early evening way. Chris already stood by the entrance of the path, leaning on a fence with this expression, like he had been waiting not just for me, but for something to judge. At first, Everything felt normal. We walked along the trail, stepping over patches of mud, passing a few joggers and dog walkers. He talked about surface stuff, work, hobbies, nothing unusual. I thought maybe it would be one of those quiet dates where you just get to know someone without drama. Then, just as the trail curved near a row of trees that blocked the view of the road, his tone changed. Out of nowhere, he started talking about how modern dating had gone wrong. I didn't even say anything to trigger it. He just launched into this rant about how women are too emotional and never think logically in relationships. He said it like it was a fact, not an opinion up for discussion. I stayed quiet for a moment, unsure if he was joking or trying to start a debate, but he wasn't laughing. He looked serious, annoyed even, like this topic genuinely angered him. He talked without stopping, like he had the speech prepared. He said most girls he dates make decisions based on feelings instead of logic, and that he didn't want that in his life anymore. He kept throwing around the word practical like it was the highest compliment someone could earn. The more he talked, the more it sounded like a warning instead of a conversation. He said that if I wanted anything to go further, I would have to prove I could think more rationally, that I could control emotional reactions. It felt so rehearsed, like he had given the same speech before to someone else. As we walked, he kept glancing at me like he was waiting for a reaction. I realized he wasn't expressing his thoughts, he was testing me. Every sentence sounded like a challenge, like if I disagreed, he could immediately label me as emotional and fail me from whatever standard he had in his head. I noticed how he slowed his pace whenever he said something harsh, like he wanted his words to land harder. The trail had gotten quieter, fewer people around, just the sound of our shoes crushing gravel. The silence between his comments felt heavy. He asked questions, but they weren't real questions. They were traps. Things like, do you think you're a logical person, or can you handle criticism? And if I even hesitated, he jumped on it, calling hesitation an emotional instinct. I tried to keep it light, but his face stayed cold. He wasn't trying to connect. He wanted dominance. It was like walking next to someone who had already decided I needed fixing before even knowing me. At some point, I stopped responding fully and just let him talk. He clearly wasn't interested in hearing anything from me unless it was agreement. When we reached a small wooden bridge halfway through the trail, he stopped walking and turned toward me fully like we were in some kind of serious meeting. He said emotional control was the only thing he judged people on. He said drama only happens when people can't keep themselves in check. Then he said if I couldn't handle blunt honesty, then I wasn't mature enough for something real. Mature enough. That phrase sat in my head like a bad taste. It wasn't advice. It was a ranking. He looked at me like he was waiting for me to admit he was right. The rest of the walk back felt longer than it should have. He didn't go back to light conversation. He just peppered the silence with more statements about emotional weakness and how logic separates good partners from unstable ones. It wasn't even anger. It was this cold superiority that made everything feel robotic. When we reached the parking area, he didn't say goodbye like a normal person. He just nodded once like he was closing a file in his head. Later that night, I got a long message from him. Not asking if I got home safe, not saying he had a good time. Instead, it was a recommendation. He said I should read a specific book about emotional intelligence, and that if I read it with an open mind, maybe we could meet again. He phrased it like a requirement. Read this, and then we'll see if you've improved. He said personal growth only starts when someone admits they need it. I didn't reply. I didn't block him right away either. I just stared at the message and scrolled up through our previous conversations, comparing the friendly tone he had in text with the cold evaluation I got in person. It was like two different people. I realized then that he had been waiting the whole time for the in-person meeting just so he could do this assessment. The walk wasn't a date to him. It was a test ground. And the message about that book wasn't a suggestion. It was him setting rules before anything even started. I blocked him the next morning, but for a while after, I kept thinking about how normal he seemed at first. How many people walk around like that, carrying quiet systems in their heads, waiting for someone to step into their test without knowing? I keep thinking about that moment on the trail when his tone switched and he started talking like a lecturer instead of a person. That was the real him, and I only saw it because we walked far enough that no one else was around to hear it. There's a weird moment that happens sometimes when you finally meet someone from an app. That split second where they're walking toward you and you're trying to line up the person in your phone with the person in front of you. With Tom, everything lined up too perfectly. He looked exactly like his pictures. He said all the right things in messages. He kept talking about how real conversations meant more to him than small talk. I thought that meant emotional maturity, or at least being able to disagree on things without it getting weird. I didn't realize he meant something completely different. We met at this fast food place near the edge of town, the type with sticky tables and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look tired. Nothing romantic, which was fine by me because at least it meant low pressure. The place was half empty, just a few people scrolling on their phones while eating. When he sat across from me, he instantly brought up how much he hated people who talked too much about their opinions. I didn't even know how to respond to that because he said it like it was just casual conversation. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he meant something harmless like online arguments or constant ranting. Then slowly he shifted it toward me. He said people like me were the kind of people he meant. He didn't even ease into it. He just labeled me like I was part of some group he already hated. He picked apart small things I had said in messages weeks ago and twisted them like I was trying to act morally superior just for stating basic opinions. He acted like expressing any thought at all is a personal attack on him. At first, I tried to brush it off like maybe he was just nervous or trying to seem strong. The longer I sat there, the more aggressive it got. He leaned forward with this controlled anger, not shouting, just dropping words like small punches. He started mocking the stuff I enjoyed, making fun of hobbies I mentioned, acting like liking harmless things made me weak-minded. He phrased everything like a correction, like he was doing me a favor by pointing out everything wrong with me. Every sentence started with some version of "you need to understand" or "people like you always." He spoke like he was the judge of what was acceptable. He picked apart my interests one by one, twisting them like they were symptoms of a flaw he had already diagnosed. I wasn't even arguing back. I was just sitting there, finishing my food slowly while he kept going like he had been waiting for this moment. He brought up politics next. He listed his views like they were facts carved in stone. Then he asked mine, but it wasn't a question. It was a trap. The moment I said anything, he locked onto it. He didn't just disagree. He mocked it like it was laughable. He didn't let it move on or change subject. He kept it going, demanding I explain why I thought what I thought while interrupting every answer. It wasn't a debate. It was him trying to break me down until I gave it. I noticed the way he looked at me every time I paused before answering, like he was waiting for me to surrender. That was the goal. Not the topic, not the talk. The surrender. He wanted me to admit I was wrong and praise how right he was. He literally said that if I wanted this to work, I needed to change to be better. Better, meaning like him. It wasn't even anger that I felt at that point. It was something colder. The kind of discomfort that creeps in when you realize the person across from you doesn't see you as human, but more like a challenge to conquer. The food was barely touched. He kept talking in circles, repeating the same lines, waiting for me to admit he was right. Every time I stayed quiet, he took it as me refusing to grow. He said growth only happens when you acknowledge someone smarter than you. He genuinely believed that was him. His whole tone was dripping with this weird superiority, like he thought he was doing me a favor by crushing my identity so I could rebuild it under his rules. At one point, I stopped responding completely. I just stared at the table and let him talk because everything I said was just fuel for another round of correction. He didn't pause long enough to notice I wasn't reacting anymore. He just kept going. It felt less like a conversation and more like being lectured by someone who had already written the ending and was waiting for me to read my final line. I looked around the restaurant, half hoping someone else noticed how weird it was. But everyone around us was locked in their own world, eating in silence, scrolling, oblivious. It made the whole thing feel even more isolating. He leaned back finally, like he had delivered some grand truth. Then he asked if I was ready to apologize for being wrong about everything I said. He looked at me like it was the most reasonable request in the world, like an apology was just the next step. It wasn't even about what I said. It was about control. He needed that final piece, the verbal acknowledgement that he was right and I was wrong. I stared at him and realized no matter what topic we picked, it would always end like this. It wasn't about politics, hobbies, personality. It was about him needing submission disguised as compatibility. I didn't apologize. I stood up quietly, grabbed my stuff, and walked out without rushing. He didn't stop me. He didn't even move. I could feel this confusion behind me, not because I left, but because I left without giving him the satisfaction of that last word he wanted so badly. When I stepped outside, the air felt loud. Cars passing, people talking, everyday noise that suddenly felt like a reset button after being stuck in a slow, drawn-out argument that was never really an argument to begin with. That night, he messaged me once. A single sentence asking if I had thought about what he said. I blocked him, but a weird thought crossed my mind. He probably didn't see it as losing. In his head, I probably got filed into some category like not ready or unwilling to improve, and he moved on to test the same routine on someone else. I used to think screenshots and ghosting were the worst things that could happen on a date. I didn't realize some people take dating like it's a project with files and categories and actual paperwork. When I matched with Ben, he looked like one of those people who post gym selfies and motivational captions, but his messages weren't cringe, so I gave it a chance. He picked a casual restaurant, nothing too fancy, and the whole start felt painfully normal. We ordered food, talked about boring things like work and music, scrolling through the usual first date topics that don't actually matter but fill time. It was just background noise kind of talking, the type where you're mostly just hoping the other person isn't weird. For the first half, he seemed stiff but fine. He kept asking questions like he was collecting data. Not in a curious way, more like a checklist he was ticking off. I brushed it off because people get awkward on dates, and I didn't want to overthink it. The restaurant wasn't crowded, just a low hum of people talking and cutlery clinking on plates. Nothing about the place or the atmosphere felt off. It felt like the definition of average, which almost made what happened next more messed up because it came out of nowhere. Right when we were halfway through eating, he reached into his bag and slid a thick folder onto the table. It wasn't a notebook or something casual. It looked official, like something he'd bring to a meeting. At first, I thought he was showing me something funny or maybe photos of a pet or some dumb hobby thing. Then he opened it. Inside were printed photos of girls. Not random ones. These were clearly girls he had dated. Each page had a picture stapled on, and under it were handwritten notes. Actual notes. Full paragraphs, under each one like a review. I sat there frozen, trying to process how someone could collect people like that. He flipped through the pages casually like he was proud. Under each photo were phrases written in a structured way, almost like stats. Things like communication score, emotional stability score, like he had broken human relationships down into categories to grade them. Some had red markers through certain traits, like he was crossing off what didn't meet his standard. The tone of how it was written made it worse. It wasn't angry or sentimental. It felt clinical, like he saw dating as an ongoing study instead of an actual connection. He then pulled out a single sheet of paper from the back of the folder. It was formatted like a contract. Actual lines for a signature at the bottom. He said that if things continued between us, I would need to agree to be part of his personal dating study, where he would evaluate me based on his criteria. There were sections explaining that I would need to submit to regular evaluations, answer personal questions honestly for data accuracy, and accept that my progress would be recorded. The way it was worded made it sound like he had done this before and expected cooperation like it was totally normal. In that moment, everything about the date faded into background static. The restaurant sounds, the lights, people around us, everything went flat. I was suddenly aware of how close he was sitting, how he had angled the folder toward me deliberately like he had rehearsed this reveal. He looked at me waiting for some kind of reaction. Not joking, not testing if I found it funny. He was serious. He was actually expecting me to sign. My chest felt tight, not out of fear like in a dramatic movie way, but in that slow dread of realizing someone is way more calculated than they first appeared. He had tabs in the folder labeled by names. I noticed some names were marked with symbols. One tab was thicker, which meant someone had stayed long enough to collect more pages. I didn't want to imagine what those pages said. The girls in the photos were smiling like normal people, like they probably had no idea they were being studied. I wondered if any of them knew their image was being carried around like a documented case study. The thought that he was sitting across from me, analyzing everything I did, was disgusting in a quiet, cold way. He slid a pen across the table slowly. I didn't touch it. For a split second, I thought maybe this was a prank, but his face didn't change. He looked too calm. That was the part that bothered me the most. He looked like someone confident in a system he believed in deeply. Like if I walked away, he would just slide the contract back in, label the folder with my name, and add notes about my reaction before moving on to the next match without blinking. I stood up. I didn't care how it looked or if people were staring. I didn't even finish my food. I just pushed my chair back and walked away. I didn't run or make a scene. I just walked out, and the whole time, I could feel the certainty that he wasn't surprised. Like this exact moment was something he accounted for, like a predictable outcome he would record later as just another statistic. On my way out, I glanced back once through the glass. He hadn't moved. He was calmly stacking the papers, putting everything back into his folder with slow precision, like closing a file after finishing an entry. He didn't come after me, didn't call out. He just continued, like I had fulfilled my role in whatever twisted system he built in his head. I blocked him that night, but blocking someone like that doesn't feel like cutting contact. It just feels like removing a notification while knowing they still exist out there somewhere with their folder and their neatly sorted tabs. I keep thinking about those girls' faces. How many of them left like I did? How many stayed long enough to become more than one page? The worst part is wondering if my picture is in that folder too, sitting under a fresh page with a line already started, marked with whatever word he uses when someone leaves too early to test properly. I always thought I was pretty good at spotting weird energy online, like I could scroll through a profile and just know who was trouble. Jake didn't raise a single alarm. His pictures looked normal, nothing cringe or over-edited. He had that kind of effortless confidence, like he was used to getting what he wanted without trying too hard. He sent normal messages, not the try-hard kind or the dry one-word replies. It sounds stupid, but it sort of felt like he'd actually read my profile instead of just reacting to photos like everyone else. So when we met for the first date at this small cave, I actually let my guard down. The date went smooth, nothing intense. Just casual talking, laughing, acting like he actually cared about what I was saying. When it ended, I remember walking home thinking, finally someone that doesn't feel like I'm just filling some slot in their day. So when he texted saying the second meetup should be somewhere more chilled, away from crowds, because he didn't really like loud places, I didn't question it. He picked a park far from town, a type of place people only go to walk dogs or jog. It wasn't totally empty, but it had that weird quiet where you can hear the wind move through trees and distant footsteps sound too clear. I got there before him, standing near this old bench with moss growing on the legs. For a second, I thought about leaving because meeting someone in a quiet place like that suddenly felt like a bad idea. He pulled up and waved like everything was normal, and that stupid sense of politeness made me stay. He didn't waste time acting all soft like the first date. His whole vibe had switched. He stood in front of me with that look, not angry or anything, just like he was measuring something. Then he said it like he was announcing something he expected me to accept without question. He was married. He called it an open situation. He made it sound like his wife was totally fine with it, and I just needed to be more open-minded. He kept talking like I should be flattered to even be considered, like it was some kind of opportunity. I just stood there, trying to process how someone could go from pretending to be genuine to laying out something that twisted like it was some quiz I had to pass. The more I stayed quiet, the more he kept pushing. Not yelling or being dramatic, just calmly repeating it in different ways, like he was testing how much pressure it would take for someone to give in. He said he only dates girls who can understand his lifestyle. He said trust was important and that this was his way of seeing who was compatible. That word stuck with me. Compatible. Like this was some selection thing, not an actual connection. At that point, the whole park felt different. I started noticing how isolated it was, how the only sounds were birds and my shoes shifting in the dirt. He wasn't standing that close, but it felt like he was too near. He kept stepping forward after every sentence, closing space slowly like he wanted me to get used to being cornered. I said I didn't want that. He didn't react, just kind of tilted his head like he'd been waiting for that answer. Then he said that's how most people respond first, and that with time, they change their mind. It was the way he said it that made my stomach twist, like he already had a method for this, like I was just another person on some list. He mentioned other girls who adjusted after a few meetups. I don't know why that creeped me out more than anything, but the way he said it, like they didn't want it at first either, but still, eventually they stayed. He sounded proud, like he was good at molding people. He asked if I wanted to meet them. He said they sometimes meet people together, just to see how they react to the dynamic. I must have looked weirded out because he smiled slightly. Not a friendly smile. More like someone watching you figure out you're stuck. I took a step back, and he didn't move, just watched. Then he said something like there's no need to be uncomfortable. It's better to know now whether I'm the type that adapts. Again with that testing tone. Like he wasn't asking to date me, he was evaluating me. I noticed then that his car was parked differently from before. He had moved it closer to the path, angled like he could leave fast or block someone from passing. I don't know if he did that on purpose or if I was just paranoid, but it hit me then how empty the whole area was. No one else around the path, just distant shapes of people way across the field. He must have sensed that shift in my body language because his expression changed, just slightly, like he was satisfied with something. The whole time he spoke in this calm tone like he was above normal dating rules, and I was just too closed off to understand. The more he talked, the worse it got. He said commitments are only real when they're tested. That word again. Tested. It was like all of this was some long psychological game for him. He wanted me to push back so he could push harder. It wasn't about inviting me into something. It was about control, wrapped in fake modern relationship talk. I told him I had to go. He didn't try to stop me, but he didn't move either. He just stood there watching as I walked away. Every step I took, I expected to hear his footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. As I drove off, I saw him in the mirror still standing in the same spot, not leaving, just watching like he was memorizing the whole thing for later. Later that night, he messaged me once. Just a single sentence asking if I'd thought about it more. I blocked him without replying. But I keep thinking about the way he said that other people change their minds eventually. I keep wondering how many people stood in that same park, hearing the same calm voice, thinking it was just an odd conversation before getting pulled into something they didn't agree to. He made it seem like walking away was just another part of his process, like he was fine with it because he believed people always come back. I never went back to that park, but sometimes I scroll past random profiles and wonder how many of them are like Jake, pretending they're giving you a choice while slowly sizing you up to see how long before you bend.